When you get serious about growing and storing your own food to eat on a year-round basis, one of the best first investments you can make is a large cold storage space like what we've got behind this door right here. This especially applies if you live in a cold climate like us and your garden is covered with snow half of the year. But if building a legitimate cold storage room is not within your capabilities right now, and you'd still like to get started with long-term vegetable storage, then there are still a few crops you can grow and store for extended periods, even if you don't have a cold storage space. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, technically I could dehydrate or can pretty much anything and then store them on a shelf like this, and I wouldn't need any refrigeration then. And sure, you could, but that's a lot of extra work. In this video, I just want to keep things as simple as possible for you. So we're just going to talk about the crops that you can store in their raw state for an extended period, without any processing at all. Just harvest them, put them on a shelf, and eat them when you're ready. Here we go. The first crop on the list is winter squash. I just love when food from my garden comes wrapped in its own natural packaging, and winter squash is a perfect example of this. The hard exterior of this butternut squash has allowed it to stay in fine shape throughout the winter months without any extra attention from me. Now, the long-term storage ability of winter squash can vary quite a bit depending on the variety, but in general, we've found that we can count on at least 3 to 4 months with any of the winter squash varieties, even when stored at room temperature. We simply load up a bunch of trays like this, store them on shelves in our basement at 15 to 20 degrees Celsius or 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's it. We just come and grab them as we need. By around month 5, we start to notice some depreciation in varieties, so we eat those first. And by month 7, where we are right now, at the start of May, we've just got a few of the hardiest squash left. We've got butternut and delicata in the box here. The exterior of these delicata squash have changed from a white and green striping to this yellow color, but the interior still tastes fine. So this is one of the last squash on our shelf, usually. And butternut can really go the distance with its extra hard shell. Let's see how this one looks on the inside here. So there we are, month 7, no sprouting or anything of any kind. Smells good. Yeah, we've still been using these pretty regularly in, well, Rachel likes to put them in pretty much all of our baked goods, even cinnamon buns included. We had squash nochi last night. Basically everything can be infused with a little bit of squash, so it's a great crop to hold throughout the winter months. Shrek reminded us that onions have layers, and that is one of the keys to their long storage life. Even though there's a high moisture content inside this onion, the layers help preserve that moisture. You see, as one layer dries out, there's just another layer underneath. So yeah, over time, in long-term storage, the onions can get a little bit smaller when you're not refrigerating them at all, but this onion is still 7 months old and it's just been stored at room temperature in our basement. Varieties that you'll find in seed catalogs that are classified as storage onions will have a higher level of pyruvic acid, which is one of their keys to a long storage life. The sweeter onions can still be stored at room temperature for a few months. We've pushed those to the limit down here as well, but ideally a sweet onion is going to need some cold storage to last through the winter. Whether you're storing your onions in a cold space or in room temperature, one of the keys is making sure that you've got sufficient airflow around the onions. So never pack them into an enclosed box. Milk crates are great. Open mesh sacks are great to allow airflow and give you the longest storage life possible. Now, for super long-lasting onions, we still want to make sure we throw them in our cold storage room. So that's where most of our supply is. And in that space, we can prevent them from sprouting all the way until the middle of next summer. But that doesn't discount the remarkable storage life of an onion, even at room temperature. So they still made the list. Ah, sweet smell of flavor. There's little more we need to spice up our winter dishes than a few cloves of garlic, so I'm thankful that this is another crop that can go the distance without any cold storage. In fact, we want to avoid refrigerating our garlic because cold temperatures can actually initiate sprouting earlier than we want. This garlic was harvested 9 months ago, and since it finished its curing process in summer, it's just been sitting down here on open shelves. One of the keys to that long storage life is harvesting it at the right time. Because we did harvest it at the right time, we see many intact layers of papery skin on the exterior of our garlic, and underneath those outer papery layers we see that each clove is also wrapped individually. So there's a lot of moisture protection here to prevent our garlic cloves from drying out throughout the winter. If we harvest our garlic too early, then the cloves won't have their own individual wrapping like this. They won't be fully separated, and if we harvest them too late, these outer papery layers will have already disintegrated and there will be less protection around the entire bulb. Now, despite all of these layers, the moisture content in our garlic will eventually drop substantially, and eventually we'll start to see some roots developing here. This clove, I can see if I peel back the layers, has a couple of small roots emerging from the bottom. Maybe you can see that. And slicing through this clove showed that there's also a little green core inside. And eventually we'll see that develop into a green stem emerging from the top of each clove. But even when that happens, it's still edible, it still tastes great. But I don't see any sprouts emerging from this batch of garlic right here. And like I said, it's been 9 months since we harvested this stuff last summer. It's pretty remarkable. When growing green beans, we need to be particular about the harvest timing, and once they're harvested, we really don't have a lot of storage life to work with either. But dried beans are an entirely different game. We can plant and tend the beans the same way as any other bean crop, but we don't have to pay attention to the harvest window. We can just let them sit out in the field and come back once all the pods have dried on the plants, and then we can just pick everything all in one action. You'll know that your beans are dry enough to pick when you hear a little rattling noise inside like this. You should be able to hear that in my mic there. And at that point we can just crack them open and we've got some nice fat beans inside. At this point we typically harvest all of the beans and just set them aside because we've got a lot of other things to focus on during the summer months. And then we can come back to the task of shelling beans at some point in the future when we have a bit of downtime. Once we've separated the beans from their pods, we just store them in unsealed canning jars like this on the shelf behind me here. Just always make sure that they're thoroughly dried before you pack them away like this. When you think about growing corn in your home garden, you're probably going to imagine fresh corn on the cob. Me too. It's one of the treats of every summer. But there's another variety of corn called Flint corn, which has different characteristics. Unlike sweet corn, it has a low sugar content and a high starch content, and when left on the plant to dry completely, we end up with a really hard ear of corn like this that we can store at room temperature all winter long. We can then strip the kernels to mill into our own cornmeal or corn flour, or just throw those kernels into our air popper and enjoy some homegrown popcorn. We've grown classic varieties of Flint corn in the past, like this glass gem variety, which has beautiful colors to it. And we can still get this variety to pop reasonably well, but since popcorn is our favorite use of Flint corn, we've switched to a better performing variety called Caramel Crisp. The yield is better, and the resulting popcorn is much more puffy and round and spherical. Better in all ways. Moving on. Sunflower seeds are another snack item that we can grow at home with relative ease. Now you'll find plenty of sunflower varieties out there from most seed suppliers, so be careful to look for a confectionery variety. This indicates that the sunflower will produce seeds for you and not just a pretty flower. Sunflowers are another incredibly low maintenance crop, and it's always fun to watch them grow. When the heads have matured, cut them off to let them dry fully, then rub out the seeds and store them at room temperature in any container that will keep them dry. I'm sure you'll come across concerns online about sunflower seeds going rancid, and yes, this is a possibility, but it depends entirely on how the sunflowers have been treated. If they're roasted first and then put into storage, this is much more likely to happen. This study showed that raw sunflower seeds are shelf stable for more than 12 months. So remember that you're working with a fresh product that you just got from your garden. It hasn't been sitting on a grocery store shelf for months already before you buy it. You can definitely keep your sunflower seeds in good shape throughout the winter without any concerns about them going rancid for you. Admittedly, we're not growing and using as much sunflower seeds as I would like to. That's all because of one unique characteristic of the sunflower seed, and that is that every individual seed is wrapped with its own shell, which makes it difficult to process on a larger scale. So one of the projects on my wish list is to build a little home-scale de-shelling machine that we can use to strip the shells from all of our sunflower seeds automatically. And once we break through that barrier, it'll be much more feasible to use larger quantities of our homegrown sunflowers in things like granola or cookie recipes, or even just sprinkled over a salad. But until that time, I think they'll be restricted to just simple snacking. The last three crops on our list we've reclaimed from large-scale agriculture. Now, some would say that these crops are not worth my time, and if we're only considering the economic value of my time, then I would certainly agree. But I'm sure you can all think of things that you do that are not worth your time, economically speaking, because there's more to life, right? In our case, I thought we've got vegetables covered. We grow all that we can eat already, so why not branch out into a few other crops that we are eating but not growing? So we looked at what we were eating and what we could actually grow here in Saskatchewan, and we found there were a few crops that we were missing previously. Now, when thinking about the labor required to grow some of these crops that are usually grown more at a larger scale, I quickly became concerned about the efficiencies of the threshing process. So to get around that, I built a small-scale mini threshing machine that we could use on our home site here. It's been working quite well, but I'm not going to explain that again in this video. I'll just link to that video at the end of this one in case you want to check it out. Now, on with the list. Wheat was the first crop that we reclaimed from Big Ag. Why, you ask? Well, we eat bread, and we want to continue eating bread. I thought it would be great if the bread we ate didn't depend on a bunch of chemicals or diesel fuel. The seeding was quick with the same mechanical seeder that we use for some of our vegetable crops. There was virtually no maintenance required throughout the growing period, and harvest was honestly quicker than I expected. The threshing was made easy, of course, by our little threshing machine, and after the grain is separated, we store it in these 3-gallon buckets and pull it out to use for bread as needed in the winter. Oh, I should mention it's pretty handy to have this wheat mill at home as well. So we just pull out a scoop of grain, dump it in the top, turn it on, and we get flour. Plug it in up here. Boop. Here we go. Kind of loud. Okay, that was a very small batch, but you get the idea. Got instant flour. The red Fife variety of wheat that we chose makes excellent bread, and my wife has done a fabulous job of perfecting that recipe, haven't you, Rachel?
Oh yeah.
Now this freshly milled flour is not as shelf stable as the whole grains, so we'll just keep the whole grains in a bucket like this and mill our flour as needed whenever we want to make some bread. After some initial success with wheat, I looked at some other grains that we were eating but not growing, and oats was an obvious next choice. Most oats are difficult to hull, which is why they were traditionally grown more for animal feed, and it's why most of the oats grown today are taken to an industrial plant to hull and roll with large-scale mechanized processes that I can't really pull off as a home grower. But thankfully there is another type of oats called Hulless Oats, which still have hulls, but the groats knock out of their hulls much more freely. We grow our oats the same way that we grow our wheat, aside from changes to the spacing and harvest timing. And the threshing machine is used for this crop as well. After that work is done, our oats are stored in 3-gallon buckets. And while we don't mill our oats into flour, we did pick up this handy dandy, it's hand-powered oat roller. That works like this. Pour it in the top, get oats out the bottom. So there's a look at some freshly rolled homegrown oats. Like the wheat, the oats store best as a whole grain, so we'll keep them in buckets until it's time to use, and then whenever we want to make some granola, cookies, porridge, or baked oatmeal, we'll just come down here, roll what we need, and take it upstairs to the kitchen to put it to work. And finally, the last crop on our list is the lowly lentil. Every lentil plant will produce many pods, but each lentil pod will only contain 1 or at most 2 lentils inside. So harvesting a large patch of lentils by hand could be potentially quite ridiculous. I only took on this crop because I already had the threshing machine built for our wheat and oats, and after a little experimentation I was delighted to find that I could indeed run the lentils through the same threshing machine and get some satisfactory results. Now there's still some refining that needs to happen in our harvesting process to streamline our labor a little bit more efficiently, but our yield at this small scale was higher than the industry average, and we don't use lentils as often as we do oats and wheat, so we don't need to devote as much space to this crop. Therefore, I think we'll continue to fit lentils into our crop lineup each season, at least in small quantities. Oh, and if it's not obvious, once the threshing process is done, we just store the dried lentils in unsealed canning jars like this on the shelves behind me here. Doesn't get much easier than that. That brings us to the end of our list of 9 crops that we can grow and store for extended periods without any refrigeration. If you're growing in a different climate than us, you may be able to think of a few additional crops that you could include in your list that will have the same extended storage capabilities. But I think in general what you'll find in this category of crops is that the list is relatively short compared to the rest of the things that we could be growing, and the crops on this list are generally going to be the ones that have the lowest value per square foot. And that's one of the reasons we knew that we needed to have cold storage as part of our game plan for food security. Our walk-in cooler allows us to store many more crops for an extended period. And this also allows us to harvest our crops in bulk and not worry about having to eat or process everything right away. It's basically like having our own private grocery store right underneath our kitchen. Sadly, most houses today do not come equipped with a cold storage room like this, but you can change that, and I'd love to show you how. This June, I'm heading down to the Homestead Festival near Nashville, Tennessee to teach a session on mastering cold storage. I'll show you everything you need to know to build your own cold storage room at home and how to use that space to store your vegetables for as long as possible. I'll leave a link to the Homestead Festival in the video description along with a discount code if you'd like to grab yourself some festival passes. I hope to see some of you there in person. But if a trip to Nashville is not a possibility for you, I do have a couple of introductory cold storage videos already on my channel. I'll link to those in the description. And of course, I cover the subject of vegetable storage in great detail inside my Seed to Table course, so you could always take the fast track and join me there. We could get you set up with your own cold storage space by next season. Imagine enjoying your own personal supply of homegrown carrots on a year-round basis. That is the world we live in today, and I'd love to help you get there too. Until then, keep growing and storing what you can, and I'll see you in the next one.